opportunities coaching program, podcast, and we have some articles and other things along the way. And then also we hope that we'll see you at some conferences coming up. I will introduce you to the panelists in a minute, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of brief about our agenda for today. So, thank you. I just want to do welcoming and introductions, and then we're going to have a presentation on what is strategic planning, and then how a strategic plan is created. And then we'll have question and answer opportunities. So we ask that you put your questions in the chat, and Nicole is going to moderate those for us. And so we welcome your feedback. I, of course, have questions too. So we'll use those if we need to, but we prefer to use yours. And we will wind down at 1 o'clock and stop on the dot so that we value your time. So we have a really experienced lineup this afternoon. Lisa Schaefer will be our first presenter. She is a consultant with Kafferlin Strategies, where she works on curriculum and management consulting. She also owns RealTalk Strategies and has for over 2 decades, where she's worked with local governments and associations to help support them, helping organizations work through day-to-day operations and then policy challenges. Chelsea Puff is our second presenter today. She is a program manager with Kafferlin Strategies, and she manages a wide range of services. Her knowledge is deep also. She's spent almost 20 years supporting local government, especially with planning. That's her expertise. And then we're joined today by my business partner, Ben Kafferlin, who you met last month. And he and I own Kafferlin Strategies and CivilLink. And we're pleased to have Nicole Heminger with us as well today, who has many years in local government too. I love our deep bench, and serves as our development director for both Kafferlin Strategies and CivilLink. And she will help join as moderator of the questions. Before we launch into the presentation, we want to remind you to mark your calendars for the third Wednesdays in 2026. Next month will be Pay with Purpose, and where we'll discuss compensation. We know that that is a big question that we frequently get asked. So mark your calendar for the third Wednesday in June. And welcome, Lisa. Thank you for joining us today, and you can take it away.
Very good. Can everybody still hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thanks for having me be here today. I'm actually in a very strategic planning kind of day between different organizations. So this is a nice little sandwich for me. But, you know, talking with a number of these organizations and local governments, you know, one of the things I hear a lot is we're too small for strategic planning. Like some of these things you see on the screen here, you know, we don't need a giant consultant report. We don't have time. We already know what needs to be done. So let's acknowledge the reality in the room before we get started. You know, if you've ever thought any of these things, you know, honestly, you're not wrong. A lot of local governments hear strategic plan, they picture an expensive process, a giant binder on a shelf, a lot of meetings that nobody really has time for. But the reality is, whether you have a plan or not, you're already making decisions every single day. Go ahead, thank you. Most municipalities, most local governments I've found don't struggle because they don't care. They struggle because everyone's busy solving the problems directly in front of them, trying to get through the day-to-day. They're reacting instead of leading into the future. They're looking at new ideas that are coming from residents or from conferences they go to that replace the things that they thought they were doing that were priorities. Staff get confused about what actually matters most because things are jumping from place to place. Residents, when they make requests, they think that automatically means something's going to happen with it. budget discussions become sort of knee-jerk reactions instead of strategically investing into the future. And everybody gets pulled in different directions. Because when everything feels important, it becomes really hard to know what matters most. So we talked about, what people think strategic planning is, that giant set of binders on the left there, a huge report, a one-time meeting, the exercise you're supposed to go through, and then you walk away and you forget about it until the next time it comes up. What strategic planning actually is, it's really just a roadmap for your future. And it's also something you can use to guide your decisions. So you have sort of, some key guardrails to how you build decisions going forward. It also is really nice for putting your board and your staff on the same page and keeping you moving in the same direction. So everybody's clear what the priorities are. Everyone's clear how you're moving forward together. And it provides that a way for you to decide on choices in the future. If we have resources to invest in A versus B, what have we already decided that our priorities are? So strategic planning, it's really not about being fancy, but it's about being intentional so that you don't leave your future to chance. Right, so who here remembers the game Candyland, right? So you start down at the bottom of the board there, you pull a random card, you move wherever it tells you. There's not really any strategy involved, right? You might pick all the right cards and in a couple of turns make it up to the candy castle there at the top. It might pull a card and one by one by one, itty bitty space, it takes forever. Or you might make it almost to the end and pull the card that sets you back, 30 spaces on the board. But you never know, it's always up to chance. And that's what operating without a strategic plan can feel like, because you're just reacting to whatever comes next. You move based on what the circumstances are that are held to you. And you're just hoping that things work out, that you'll eventually make it to your finish line. So with a strategy, you're really trying to figure out where you're trying to go. So your candy castle, but you're evaluating your choice. You're actually saying, which card do I want from the deck? Which card is going to help get me to my goal? So, and you're intentionally setting aside those resources. You're allocating your time, your money, where it really matters. And you can adjust. So if you get, a card that doesn't quite get you where you want to go, you can adjust without losing the direction that you're actually trying to have. So it becomes much more of a game of random chance and much more a game of strategy and trying to move yourself forward in the most intentional way possible. I said this a few minutes ago, but a strategic plan should really be a decision-making process, a decision-making tool. A lot of the questions that you might ask yourselves every day: should we add this new program? Why are we funding this project? What do we tell this resident when they ask for something? What matters most this year? How do we even know if we're being successful? Again, it can be hard when you're in that day-to-day, but what you're trying to do is keep your municipality, your local government moving forward to plan for the future. And I want to be clear on something here. A strategic plan doesn't eliminate the choices, but it gives you a framework for making them. So if you're a member of a board or a member of a staff, probably both thought, why don't they understand what we do all day? The governing body, the council, often thinks, why isn't this moving faster? Why are we saying no? Why can't we just do this? On the other side, the staff might say, they don't understand how overworked we are. Everything just seems urgent right now. Why do we keep changing direction? We can't keep going like this. And usually neither side is entirely wrong. They're just looking at the same situation from a different set of responsibilities and a different set of pressures. And that's where strategic planning comes in. It creates a set of shared expectations and shared direction. Boards help define where you're going, and then staff helps determine how you realistically get there. And you need both of those pieces to be able to move forward together. But everyone has to see the same picture of where you're going in order for that to happen. So strategic planning is a tool for helping you say both yes and no without making it personal, right? One of the hardest things in local government is that every request usually comes from a real need. Somebody wants a new park, somebody wants a pothole filled or a new event, They want you to have expanded hours for a service or create a new committee to study something. And without a plan, decisions can really start to feel very reactive and very personal. You know, is this my neighbor? Is this, you know, what's going on here? How do we make those decisions? With a plan, you can start to ask real questions. How does this actually align with our priorities? Do we have the capacity and the budget to make this happen? If needed, you know, if we took on this project, what would we have to delay? Either because we don't have the time right now to do both things, or we don't have the resources to do both things. So which comes first? Is this the right time? So that allows you to make decisions without being personal, but actually make them based on sound logic and reason, based on the direction that you've chosen to move forward. It creates permission for you to focus on what matters. Go ahead, Nicole. Thanks. So really, you know, another way of thinking, we talked about a roadmap, we've talked about, you know, the game of Candyland. Another way to think about a strategic plan is like your compass. It's just deciding what matters most and keeping you pointed in the right direction. It helps provide you with how you make investments, who takes ownership of things, how are they aligned with what we're trying to do, where we're trying to go. Do we say yes or no? How are we making progress toward the vision that we see for our future? What comes first? What are our priorities? Are we actually on the same page? Not just between the council, the board, and the staff, but between the council, the staff, and your community. Is everybody moving in the same direction? Do we all understand what we're doing here? Strategic plan helps you orient without making every decision feel brand new and having to rehash all those criteria again and again and again. Believe it or not, you actually already have a strategy. The question is it an intentional strategy? You know, a strategy that says we're just going to evaluate every decision when it comes up, that's a strategy. It's just not one that's necessarily focused and prioritizing your resources and your time and your decisions. Every budget decision, every staffing discussion, every resident request, and every new initiative is already shaping the future of your municipality. Strategic planning, and again, this does not have to be a complicated process. It just simply helps you shape that future on purpose instead of by accident or by chance. So strategic planning doesn't have to be overwhelming. If we've decided that it's a good thing to do and now we're all really excited to do it, what does a practical process actually look like? And I'm going to turn things over to Chelsea to walk us through exactly that.
So building off of what Lisa was just talking about, and I want to point out, Lisa and I developed our slides separately. And then yesterday afternoon, when I hopped in here to look at what Lisa had put in, I was like, oh my goodness, we are hitting on the same notes. It's like we did this together. So I think that just drives home the point that these are the really important key topics that we need to talk about today. So kudos to Lisa for presenting all of this content to lead into process. I'm a process person. I love process. So I'm really excited to talk to all of you today about this. Building off of what Lisa just mentioned, I think sometimes when people hear strategic planning, again, they picture that massive binder sitting on a shelf somewhere collecting dust. It's huge. It doesn't speak to them. It's daunting. It's intimidating. They don't like it. But for most communities, what strategic planning really means is creating those intentional conversations about what matters most to them. And it does not have to be complicated. You don't need a years-long process. You don't need a huge budget. You just need enough structure to help everyone move forward in the same direction together. In reality, the most effective plans are often the simplest and the most practical. The goal is not perfection. Yes, everyone note that today Chelsea said the goal is not perfection. Type A Virgo Chelsea is not shooting for perfection today. The goal is alignment. A good process creates intentional conversations about what matters most, what the community is trying to do, and how limited time and resources should be used to accomplish those goals. Most smaller communities complete strategic planning processes in just a few months, and often with very modest budgets and very simple structures. The process can absolutely be scaled to fit your organization's size, capacity, and culture. The good news is that the strategic planning process is less mysterious and complex than people expect. There are a lot of ways communities approach this process, but most successful plans tend to follow a similar flow. Build support, gather the right people, collect input, define the priorities, draft the actual plan, and then most importantly, get it done, do it. And implementation is really the key word here, because the value of the strategic plan is not the document itself. It's actually what happens after adoption. So let's walk through a few ways to make each part of that process practical and manageable for you. As Lisa mentioned, one of the biggest benefits of strategic planning is that creation of shared understanding. And honestly, we see it all the time in what we do in the communities we work in every day. A lot of tension in organizations does not come from bad intentions. It comes from people working from different assumptions and not communicating properly. Boards are hearing from residents, and staff are managing capacity and daily workflows. Everyone cares, but they're often experiencing different versions of the same organization. Strategic planning helps everyone take a step back and say, what are we actually trying to accomplish here? A strategic plan is often less about creating brand new ideas. So you're not looking for those light bulb moments, those aha moments. You're really looking for creating that shared understanding, because sometimes the problem is not that people disagree. It's that everyone else thought someone else was already working on it and had already decided it, and everyone was just moving forward without really communicating what that forward meant. Community engagement is an area where people sometimes overcomplicate the strategic planning process. The reality is you're already getting feedback constantly. You probably already have input from different sources. Strategic planning just helps you organize it. Residents tell elected officials things at the grocery store or the ball field, for better or for worse. Staff hear recurring concerns every single day. Comments show up during budget discussions, project meetings, public meetings. Strategic planning just creates a way to organize those themes into priorities. Again, the goal is not perfection. The goal is perspective. Residents usually don't even expect perfection. They do expect quality, and they want clarity, communication, and evidence that someone is listening and someone is doing something about it. One thing that I've found throughout my planning career and all of these different planning projects is that you often hear the same themes repeated over and over during a planning process. And maybe it's lack of communication or infrastructure improvements or economic growth, staffing capacity, responsiveness. The value isn't necessarily discovering something brand new through this process. The value is identifying the patterns and coming up with a plan of attack for those patterns. Is engagement important to the planning process? I would be a really bad planner if I told you that it wasn't. It is absolutely critical to the planning process, but it should be scaled to match your community's size, your capacity and needs, and not become someone's full-time job as a part of this process. The strategic planning retreat is really where all of this groundwork starts to come together. And when I say retreat, that is an industry term. I'm not talking about running off to the country club on a weekend for a golf outing. I'm not talking about hitting the day spa and getting your nails done. I'm talking about getting away from your everyday work environment. And that can mean meeting in a community center. It could be meeting at the local fire hall, or even just like getting out of your office or away from your desk and going into council chambers and having these discussions. That's the retreat part. And this is the opportunity to bring forward survey results, those recurring themes that you've hopefully already spotted, staff observations, community feedback, and most importantly, those organizational realities that you're facing every day. And then intentionally talk through what they actually mean. One of the most important parts of the retreat itself is creating space for honest discussion and a whole lot of gut check moments. Do people agree with the findings? Are there any surprises? Are there disconnects between someone's perception and reality? And what are those themes that keep resurfacing? Good retreats balance both quantitative and qualitative information. The data matters, absolutely. But lived experience, operational realities, and community perspective matter too. And the retreat itself does not have to follow one perfect format. Some organizations will do a full day retreat. Others might break it into shorter sessions over a series of a couple of weeks. The important thing is creating that focused time for intentional conversation while still maintaining momentum. If too much time passes between those sessions, then energy and continuity start to fade and your process starts to stall. If we are planning for the sake of planning, we are failing the community. We are not trying to fix everything at once here. We need to be really realistic. You can't fit 47 priorities into a 5-person staff. It'll never work. One of the biggest mistakes that communities make is trying to put every conceivable idea, project, and problem into a strategic plan, and it becomes really unwieldy. Strategic planning isn't about doing everything. It's about deciding where that focused attention is going to go over the next few years. And typically the most successful plans are 2 to 5. You really don't want to build it out longer than that. A realistic plan acknowledges something really, really important. Daily operations must continue. Staff still have to answer the phones. Water lines are still going to break. Meetings still need to happen. You still need to manage that budget. The strategic plan exists alongside of all of that, not instead of all of that. The most important part of any plan is doing it, bringing it to life, and making it happen for your community. You can go ahead, Nicole. Yeah. This is where strategic plans either succeed or die a slow, quiet, painful death. A plan only becomes useful when it starts influencing your everyday decisions. One of the easiest ways to operationalize a strategic plan is to reference it consistently. If a new project, initiative, or funding request comes up, one of your first questions should be, how does this connect to our strategic plan? During budget prep, and it's scary to say, budget season's right around the corner, folks. During budget prep, you should be asking yourself, what line items in this budget support implementation? What needs more attention? Can we move some money over here to help this initiative? If no one references the plan after adoption, the printer worked hard for nothing. You wasted the ink. You killed the trees for nothing. This process was for nothing. And what a shame that would be. So here are some quick tips to keep the plan alive and functioning for you. It's so important to tell your story, and it doesn't need to be this formal process or overly taxing for staff, but you do need to be accountable and transparent. You need to tell your story. It can and should be as simple as a quarterly review of progress at a board or council meeting, tracking progress on a spreadsheet or a basic dashboard, and then sharing it to your website. Maybe you do a periodic one-pager talking about your progress and release that to the community, or hang it on a bulletin board in your city hall. Maybe you have color-coded status updates on your meeting agendas. Maybe you reference your strategic goals and priorities during your budget conversations. Ideally, you will do all of those things and more. You need to brag. You worked hard. Tell people about it. Tell your story. Visibility matters because it creates accountability and it reminds people that the plan is actually being used. I keep promising / threatening my friends and family with a social media series called Truth Bombs by Chelsea. Luckily for you, you get to be my sample audience today. Luckily for you. I think it's important to acknowledge that strategic planning can be uncomfortable sometimes because the process forces organizations to prioritize and make hard decisions. And anytime you're prioritizing, that means you're also deciding what is not getting immediate attention, what is not important or so perceived. Not every goal will get to be completed immediately. So you're not going to get that sense of instant gratification. And in a world that's moving so fast, people want to see results now. You did the strategic plan. Why is nothing happening? What's going on? But in truth, emergencies happen, and elections happen, and staffing changes happen, and budgets change. That's normal. That's local government, and we need to roll with it. And also, honestly, some people are not going to like this process. As we've mentioned multiple times, strategic planning creates accountability, it creates focus, cohesion, and all of those things are so critically important. but sometimes it changes expectations, and that can be really uncomfortable for people. But discomfort is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is a sign that organizations are progressing and growing and getting better. You will put your whole heart into this process. You'll create this beautiful plan. You will have the best of intentions. People will still complain about it on Facebook. That will never change, and you can't do a whole lot about that. But the plan still matters, and you should do it anyway. So I know that everything that we talked about today can feel really intimidating, especially in smaller communities where everyone is already stretched really thin and you're already short of capacity. But the good news is that this doesn't have to be perfect to be valuable. You can start small, you can keep it practical, and focus on what matters most. And most importantly, remember that the goal isn't creating a perfect document. I said it again. The goal is creating better conversations, better alignment, and better decisions for your community. You can absolutely do this, no matter your size, no matter your budget, no matter your constraints. Strategic planning is for everyone.
Very nice. Thank you both so much for all that value. I feel inspired. I'm working on a presentation for tonight myself for finance at Du Bois, and I wrote down a lot of things that you said because I think I want to change my whole slide deck. So thank you both. I have a few questions. I don't know if there's anybody jumping in the chat. I want to encourage you to do so if you haven't yet, because I know there are a lot of questions around strategic planning. But Chelsea, one of the things that you mentioned was implementation and how that's key. And if you do all this planning, you put all this time in, and you don't do anything with it. And we have been in many communities where this is sitting on a shelf. And so how do you get buy-in from the people that have to actually implement this plan? What do you suggest for that for board members and team members?
I think it's really important from the very, very beginning is to choose the people that are best suited for this effort. And especially the first time that you're doing this. So let's say you've never done a strategic plan before. And I think most folks are probably in that boat. Mm-hmm. It's really important for you to be selective on who is on that committee. And I've seen all types of community makeups. I mean, sometimes it's just the elected officials. Sometimes it's staff and department heads. Sometimes it's elected officials and some volunteers from the community. It's really any type of makeup. You know the players in your community better than I ever will. So that would be one of the initial conversations that I would have with you coming in to do one of these plans with you is, who do you want to bring to your table? And especially right out of the gates with your first one, you really want people that are going to be vocal, people that are going to be engaged, and people that have some type of say in what this process is going to look like. So right from the beginning, you want to be collecting feedback from folks. Hey, what do you think this should look like for us? What are we striving for? Start doing that groundwork before that even happens and get that input from people, collect all of that information, and then choose those people that are going to help you steer that ship. And honestly, like sometimes I think it's great to have the naysayer on the committee because you're going to get some really truthful, tough pinches and feedback throughout the process. And if you can turn that person to your team and help them see the value, it's going to benefit you a lot more in the long run.
Thank you. Thank you. Lisa, do you want to speak to that at all from your experience?
I completely agree with Chelsea about making sure you've got the right people at the table. And I think it's super important to have both your board and your staff as part of that conversation, right? What I talked about before was you need your board to provide that direction. They're the governing body, but you also need your staff who have to take that direction and figure out how to make it happen on a day-to-day basis. So when you've got them both at the table to start with, you get that direction and the staff better understands the context and the conversation that's happening around it. But then the board also gets the input of staff in terms of what is our capacity? What are the resources that we have? You know, what can we make happen first, and what's going to take a longer lead in and other resources to make happen? And I think the more you're having that conversation, before Chelsea said earlier, communication, just making sure everybody's talking to each other and surfacing those expectations and surfacing those assumptions is so critical to the success of the plan in the future.
Thank you. Chelsea said earlier that it's important to have the naysayer in the conversations. And so Daniel's asking in our chat, how do you do strategic planning if you can't get buy-in? And I know we've all worked in communities where there's a lot of contention. And so I think this could be true, not just in local government, but probably in many organizations. So would either one of you like to speak to that? I mean, whether you start at another time, or what would you do if you just couldn't get people to engage?
I think the question of engagement and buy-in are a little bit different. I mean, I think, getting people to actually participate in the process and the conversation is so important to actually getting the input of folks who are going to be impacted by the plan. But in terms of buy-in, we said it before, you're never going to get everybody to agree with you. So you're never going to get rid of the naysayers. What you can do is surface the common themes, surface the consensus, surface, the ideas that are coming up and bubbling to the surface in your community, and keep building on those. And it might even, be a matter of having the conversation over and over again so that people feel that they've been really heard. You really need to dig into the whys behind their question. A simple statement like, tell me more. What can you share about that? So really understand, what's behind the surface question. Sometimes when people articulate a question, we start telling a story about, what that means in our heads, but we really need to understand where people are coming from. I think the more that you do that, yes, it's a long process, it's an intensive process, but the more that you do that, the better your plan is actually going to be, and the more bought in people will start to feel because their input had value at the end of the day.
I think that's 100% on the mark. Sometimes with those folks who are those naysayers, or they're a little bit negative on the process and they're not quite buying into what you're trying to do, they need some special attention. They might need some hand holding. It's been the case where sometimes I've taken that person out to coffee and just asked those questions, like, what is your challenge with this? And, do you just not agree with strategic planning, period? Or is it the approach to this? And honestly, sometimes you might have to pivot your process a little bit to further try to pull those folks in and give them some of that special attention. It does not mean you shouldn't do it. But I think that keeping those folks in mind, it is a little bit of the squeaky wheel gets the oil. But oiling that wheel makes your life so much easier downstream, because when this does go up for adoption and when it does need to be implemented, that person can make it even more difficult for you if you kind of let all of this go unattended and ignored throughout the actual planning process. So again, just give that person a little extra love, a little extra attention, and really help them feel heard and seen.
So in that same vein, that person that can make this, feel difficult and making them feel heard, I want to speak just for a minute, because every community faces this. What about the person who's only engaging through social media? You talked earlier about the Facebook comments and how it is maybe important to include those in what the desires are from people in the community. And some people are just not going to show up in the room in person for whatever their personal reasons are. And so how do you take the information from social media and validate it enough to give it credence when you're working on a plan?
Well, I think we could have a whole separate webinar on social media processes and how to deal with social media comments. So Nicole, maybe write that one down for a future date. But I think communication is so important in all forms, and getting ahead of the narrative is really critical. You need to put out your own story, which is, part of that. Tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. Tell it early and tell it often. Get ahead of that communication. And then I've even done things too where I've seen the negative comment. You can't ignore it, and it's not going to go away, and it's just going to fester. It's like the graffiti on the bridge. You can't just leave it there. So I've done things in presentations where, I've had a whole feedback section. I put it right in the feedback section. You can't hide from it. They said something bad about this process. They said something bad about this community. You need to own it and put it out there, and then show your evidence as to why maybe that's not a valid concern or a valid complaint. And here's what we did instead. You have to at least look at the negative, feel the pinch, maybe feel really bad about it for a little bit, grumble about it, go home, complain to your husband about it, whatever. Move on with it the next day and own it and make it part of the process.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Lisa, do you want to say anything about the social media aspect?
I mean, I think it's a difficult challenge we're all living with, but in public meetings, you're going to have people who show up and do the same thing in person, and you have to be prepared to listen, to try to understand, to see how that incorporates and kind of bounces against the beliefs and the truths that you are holding. It's just different that it's in person versus on the screen, but like in a public meeting, you can't just ignore it either. It's still somebody in your community who still has valid thoughts and input to offer.
Thank you. Lisa, in your portion of the presentation, you talked about how most municipalities are already in an informal strategic plan, or they have strategy, they just don't even know it. And so even though it's not been written down, how would you speak to a community about that, allowing them to see how their priorities are rising up?
Like, I think the first thing to do there is, if you have an informal, if your plan is that we don't have a plan, we're making decisions off the cuff, we're doing the knee-jerk reactions, then it's time to may say, okay, we actually need a real plan. But if your plan is, you've surfaced the same themes, you've kind of outlined your priorities in these public meetings, it's time to get them on paper and really have the conversation. Because as I think we've said throughout this whole process, even if you think that you're thinking the same things between your board, your staff, your community, are you really? Like, if you actually have that conversation, are you really? So when you start putting those things on paper and making sure that you are in fact, I heard a quote a couple of weeks ago that, we don't all see the world the same way, but we all see the same world. So this is a way of trying to make sure, how's everybody seeing the world? So when they look at it through their different lenses, that we're actually going toward the same place. So, and because it's also very easy, I found, you set goals, you set priorities, and it can become very easy to say, well, sure, here's this idea. We can kind of shoehorn it into this goal, this priority. It fits, we can still make it happen because I can make my special project fit into this priority. When in reality, you're really kind of putting that square peg in a round hole. And I think if you've got it written down and you've already surfaced what are actually the things that we're all on the same page about, it makes it a little bit harder to work around those edges and try to force things through that don't really quite align.
Thank you. Kind of along that same lines, as we're talking about this, Chelsea mentioned how important the data is. And I think that just what we're talking about with people having a plan but not really having it written down, they make a lot of decisions based on feeling. And so I think that there is a pivot in local government to make sure that we're really making data-driven decisions, but sometimes these small communities don't know where to dig up and how to gather the data. Chelsea, do you want to talk about the places that they can go and what kind of data they should be gathering to make those more, really responsible decisions that aren't just because they want it?
Sure. So it can look like there's infinite possibilities for this, really. I mean, and it really depends on that community engagement part of what we were talking about earlier. And I'm always cautious to let that derail the whole process, because we can get really hung up on what people are saying. And even though that we know internally that doesn't align with our budget, we just can't possibly do all these things. but you can source it from any number of ways. You can, going back to Facebook, you can source Facebook for feedback and collect all of that and then do some trending. If you're hearing about the pothole on 6th Street over and over and over again on Facebook, maybe the pothole on 6th Street is a problem that deserves some consideration in your strategic plan. And you can start to quantify those things together. And then also, so many of the strategic plans that I've been a part of, we've just done a simple survey for folks. It doesn't always have to go out to the community. It can go out to staff, elected officials, the people within your committee, where they can speak freely about various things that might be put into the plan and contribute their feedback. So there you're also quantifying thoughts and trends. Also, your comprehensive plan, the MPC requires that so much different, data be put into your comprehensive plan. Check it out. Check out your comprehensive plan. What was the public engagement component of your comp plan? What did that look like? And then also looking at your budget. That's a lot of data that you can source and put into your strategic plan. If you're coming up with a bunch of things that you just don't have the money to do, your budget is going to help inform what you can take on between then and to put in the strategic plan. So it can come from any different ways. And then of course, DCD has data available, the Census Bureau. If you want true data and not data that you're going to source yourself, you can always go to those sources too.
As you see the priorities rising up in these strategic plans, I'm going to speak to or ask a question about budget right now. And I would like both of your perspective on this. Of course, that's where my heart is making sure we can pay for these things that we know are really important in a community. And so when you do strategic planning, these things are really important to the people who have given their input. And then when we get to the budget time, how do you help a community realize in their budget the priorities? And do you ever sit down with them and try to shift, go through finances with them and shift the way they're doing business so that they can allow these the important priorities that are rising up to fit into their finances? Have either one of you got into the weeds of that with a community?
Not so much with the community, but with organizations that I've worked with. I think one of the good and bad parts about strategic plans, it gets everybody really excited. Like, you start thinking about all the big things, the good ideas that you have, and the vision you can have for your future. And then you sit there and say, well, wait a second, now we have to actually make this happen, right? We've got all these big ideas. And that's where, I think setting expectations early up front, we talked about in the presentation here, you can't do everything at once. That's simply not going to happen. So 2 things. One is understanding your strategic plan is about the big ideas, your goals, your vision, but also understand that it's about telling you what you shouldn't be doing. So if there are things that are happening that don't meet your goals, don't have the value, can you sideline those programs, in a non-emotional way based on the vision that you've set in your plan, the goals you've set, and shift those resources to the things that you've decided do matter to you. And then also setting the expectation, we might have to sequence some of these things. We might, we're probably not going to be able to say we can do these all at once. So what's the thing that's going to get us the most impact right up front? Where do we need to be investing first? Or are there things that need to happen before we can do other things in our plan? So you kind of sit there and say, it's not that these things are in our plan and they're not important, but just what needs to happen first, and to understand that these things are going to take some time to do.
I've done strategic planning processes where we've scored out different priorities or different attributes, projects they want to do, or, oversight buckets and so forth. And budget has always been that consideration. And if there's no money for this, does that maybe fall down the list a little bit? And we have funding for this now, so maybe that rises to the top. It's a top priority for us. And then also, I think, good strategic plans for communities will help tie those funding sources together. So maybe everything doesn't come out of your general fund or your capital improvements fund. Maybe there are some grant opportunities for you to seek to help fund these various initiatives. Maybe one of your top priorities is improving a park. So part of that process is going to be, what is good for a grant application? What can we get volunteers to do? What could we seek donations for? Can we do some in-kind work for matches to the grants? And that's all part of this strategic planning process, is thinking about every facet and phase of what you're trying to accomplish. You can't do this without thinking about money.
This is so good. I love this. Ben asked in the chat, I'm getting excited, and I'm not part of a plan right this second, at least where I'm at right now. What if we don't have a comp plan? What is the relationship between a comp plan and the strategic plan?
That's a really good question. I get asked that a lot, especially with communities that actually don't have a comp plan. So they might use one in place of the other or not do either. Both is best. As the planner of the group, both is best. So your comprehensive plan is a mandated document by the municipality's planning code, and the MPC strongly encourages you, and so does DCD, to update your comprehensive plan every 10 years. The comprehensive plan, I always say your comp plan is what you want to be when you grow up. It's long range. It's, it's 5 to 10 years. It's big projects. We want our community to be this. It's very encompassing vision statements. It's a lot of service areas. You need to address infrastructure needs, housing needs, water needs. And it's very large scale, big picture. And there are certain facets of the comprehensive plan that are mandated to be included by the municipality's planning code of Pennsylvania. Your strategic plan is much smaller in scale, and your strategic plan helps you implement that comprehensive plan. So if the comprehensive plan is this big elephant in the room, the strategic plan helps you take small bites out of that elephant to implement your comprehensive plan. So could you ride solo with a comprehensive plan? Yes, you could. Could you ride solo with a strategic plan? Yeah, you could do that too. But they work better together. One helps get the other one done. If you do not have a comprehensive plan, that's okay. One of the priorities of your strategic plan could be to create and implement a comprehensive plan. And thankfully, DCD has a lot of funding opportunities to do just that. We could do a whole other webinar on comprehensive planning, but they are different. The comprehensive plan is mandated. It's long-term. It tells you where you want to be, where you're going. The strategic plan helps you plan out how you're going to get there and what steps you need to take to reach that future.
If a community doesn't have the capacity, because some of these communities, you've given a really good path for the small ones that might have really small teams. And so if they don't have capacity to do the the comp plan, how do they make sure that they are in the county comp plan so that they at least have some kind of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but foundation for the work that they want to do in their community?
Well, a good county comp plan should consider all of the municipalities within its comprehensive plan. So if you've got a good county comp plan, that comp plan is looking at the needs of the county as a whole, but it'll never drill down to the point where it will say small X community in A county, this is what should happen specifically to you, unless that certain situation benefits the county as a whole. So if you feel like you're a small enough community and a comprehensive plan really isn't a feasible choice for you, joint comprehensive plans are incredibly popular with a lot of smaller communities, and DCD is also really in favor of joint comprehensive plans for small communities. So that is something, definitely contact your county offices to learn more about the county comprehensive plan, as well as contact your local DCED rep to see what funding opportunities are out there for you to maybe partner with your neighbors for a joint comprehensive plan.
Thank you. I see we have a question in the chat, and our time's getting near the end, so I want to make sure that I grab it. Heidi's asking, what's a strategic planning mistake you've made or observed that you'd want teams on this call to avoid? Good question.
So I'll jump in there. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see walking into a plan is people thinking they already know what the end result is going to be. That they have a game plan in mind, and okay, fine, we'll go through the formalities and we'll get to the plan at the that and document it and do the things. We'll go through this process and everything. Where really it should start with exploration, being curious about your thoughts, the thoughts of those on your governing body, of your staff, of your community, and kind of being willing to see how those pieces end up fitting together at the end of the day. They may end up fitting together the way that you think, or they may not. But if you go into it with an assumption, there's what you're looking for, you'll see more of. So if you have that goal at the end of the line, you're going to be looking for the pieces of information, the resident input that fit the path that you're trying to create, instead of taking a good comprehensive look at all of that input and seeing where it leads you for your future.
You both talked about the key of listening. And so just to kind of add to what you just said, Lisa, listening is key, and we're not always good at that if we don't have an open mind. So as leaders of walking into communities and help them create strategic plans, how do you help people open their mind to all the possibilities that come before them, from the thing that they know they need to the something that they think that isn't even possible, but how do you get them to the light bulb to come on? Maybe, I don't know.
I think you kind of hit on it earlier when we're all people, and I think it also goes back to the buy-in conversation. Managing the personalities of a group can be really challenging sometimes, depending on who is at that table with you. So that's always something to keep in mind, is who is there, what is their perspective? And again, it all goes back to that listening. I take a ton of notes in these processes, and I think it's important to send out meeting notes afterwards and continuously keep everybody on the same page. But knowing that everyone has a different personality and a different perspective, giving everybody the chance to be heard, and then going back and just thinking about that buy-in again. Who's at this table with me? What is their perspective? What is their personality? And trying to incorporate that and speak to that as often as possible has always been helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have one more question that I want to, that's kind of along with that theme, but I really love telling stories. And so, Chelsea, you touched on telling the story often and repeated. And so not only the person that's doing the work telling the story, but how do you get the story out? So how do you communicate the story consistently in the process or after the work has been done to a community? How would you share that?
I think you have to hit it on multiple fronts. So just dropping a link to the document on your website is not going to be enough. Like, yes, it should be on your website so everyone can see it and read it at leisure, and who wouldn't want to? But you have to hit it on multiple fronts. So using your social media feed is a great way. And yeah, you might get some unpleasant comments, but that's everyone's right to comment on it. So hitting it there, talking about it in public meetings is really important. Putting together just, a one-pager that people have is really important. A lot of small communities, local news is sort of falling by the wayside, but you do see these like fledgling groups where someone comes in and that's now the news reporter for your community, and they might be coming to all of your meetings. Having those discussions with that person, going and speaking to local community groups, your local chamber, your local business organization, having a coffee and a conversation. A lot of communities have found those to be really successful. There are all sorts of avenues to pursue. I think the important thing is choosing multiple fronts to talk about it and talking about it often.
Thanks. So we only have 5 minutes left of our time together today, and I'm wondering if either of you or anyone else in our team wants to share any of their experience or thoughts on strategic planning based on the conversations that we've had today. Ben or Nicole? No? Okay. I want to remind all of you that we are doing this on the 3rd Wednesday of each month, and the next one is on June 17th, where we will be talking about aligning roles, responsibilities, and compensation. And like I said earlier, we get asked this question a lot in the communities that we worked in, so make sure you tell your friends and have them jump on with us next month. And we will also send out reminders. I want to thank you all. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your knowledge with us, your expertise. The work that you've done in communities is amazing. I love how we get to just take care of people through this process. And so I want to thank you for the valuable input you've provided today. And I want to thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Good job, Lisa.